of God.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name's Duncan. I have the joy of being the senior pastor of the church here. And if this is your first time with us, just really delighted that you'd find us in the centre of Coventry for our first service today. When I was growing up, in the house that my parents had, we had this piece of furniture in our dining room that we called a sideboard. It was like this really large cupboard where my parents kept our best crockery and cutlery, like our best plates and our best dishes. And these were things that were only used on special occasions or maybe when we had special guests around for a meal. Anybody have that kind of thing going on at home? And then within the sideboard, there was this section that had like glass doors, and there were a couple of shelves in that. And we put the things there that were way too valuable to use. And so for the whole of my childhood, we kind of looked at those things. Now I need you to be clear, they weren't the crown jewels or anything of that kind of value, but there were some dishes, some vases. They probably had sentimental, maybe slight financial value, and therefore we just didn't want to risk using them. So for the whole of my childhood, if I remember correctly, they pretty much never moved and we just looked at them. Anybody else have that kind of experience? Like one or two things like that where they're so valuable to you that you dare not touch them or use them. Well, I use that illustration today to kick off in a way of trying to introduce you to an idea that's going to run throughout the whole of the talk today. And the idea can be summed up with this statement: the high cost of doing nothing with something of value. Or maybe to keep it in line with the sermon series, we'll probably call this idea the price of staying in the boat. Because Pastor Shireen did a wonderful job last week helping us to understand something of this great story that many of us are familiar with. We celebrated Peter's faith and his focus, the way that he gets out of the boat, the way that he walks on the water towards Jesus. But there is part of the story that we haven't thought about yet, and that's the reality of the 11 disciples who remain in the boat. These 11 who choose to be boat dwellers rather than water walkers. Like my childhood illustration of that sideboard, these are 11 disciples who decide that they will not risk breaking anything. They treasure their safety over growth. They avoid potential failure, potential embarrassment, potential pain, potential criticism, potential loss. And so they swap the ultimate walk of faith for the safety of the boat. So let me remind you of the story. It's found in Matthew 14. Of course, we've just had it dramatically read to us. Jesus has fed the 5,000. He's dismissed the crowd. And then in verse 23, we're told that he goes up on a mountainside by himself to pray. And then as he comes down the mountain, of course, then the fun stuff starts to happen. Jesus goes from the place of encounter to walking on the water. He goes from the place of prayer at the top of the mountain to experiencing the miraculous at the bottom of the mountain, which I guess even that serves as a reminder to us that the downhill of prayer can be a whole load of fun, but you do have to climb the mountain first. Like prayer can be hard on the flesh. You know, it's sometimes a bit like climbing the mountain, but unless you do the sometimes hard work of getting alone with your Heavenly Father, then it's unlikely that you'll then experience the joy of walking on the water. And so Jesus begins to cross the lake. He walks on the waves, and as he gets near the disciples, they start to think, this is a ghost. Like, who is this or what is this coming towards us? And the only way that Peter can verify whether it's Jesus or whether it's a ghost is by requesting an invitation to join him on the water, to which, of course, Jesus obliges. And he says to Peter, come. And so Peter walks on the water twice. If you look carefully at the text, once he walks towards Jesus, and then once he walks with Jesus. The first time he walks on the water because it's a response to the call of Jesus. But the second walking on the water, he's holding the hand of Jesus as Jesus has rescued him as he starts to sink. Peter walks on water. The 11 disciples in the boat don't. The 11 watch from the sidelines. The 11, well, they just pass up an opportunity to do something that they would never forget. The 11 miss out on an adventure. The 11 pay the high price for doing nothing. The cost of staying in the safety of the boat. So as we reflect on this story today, let the 11 become an image or a picture for us what it looks like when we refuse to take a risk. Like what it looks like when we choose comfort over courage. What it looks like when we ignore the call of Jesus. What it looks like when we don't use the valuable gifts and opportunities and talents that God gives us. Let the 11 today be an image for us of what happens when our lives stagnate and we pay the high cost of doing absolutely nothing. You know, 11 chapters later, from Matthew 14 to then Matthew 25, Jesus tells a parable about the 11. He tells a parable about the boat dwellers. At least in my mind, I'm speculating that he has them in mind. It's the story about a man who does nothing. It's a story of a man who's given a wonderful opportunity, but he does nothing with it. The Bible sometimes calls it the parable of the talents. In my Bible, it's called the parable of the bags of gold. If you have a Bible, I'd love you to read it with me as we just dig into this text today. Matthew 25 and verse 14 through to verse 30. And the words will be on the screen if you don't have the text in front of you. These are the words of Jesus. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one, he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another one, each according to his ability. And he went on his journey. The man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who'd received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, he said, you trusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. The man with 2 bags of gold also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I've gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. And the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you've not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and I went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I've not sown and gather where I've not scattered seed. Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. So take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. Wow, what a happy end. I'm sure God will bless the reading of his word to us. This is a story many of you will be familiar with, a CEO who calls to himself his 3 best employees. And in an act of unprecedented generosity, he entrusts each of them with some really large sums of money. This is their defining moment. In a single act, the CEO changes their lives forever. And And so the key question is, what will they do with this wonderful opportunity that they've been given? Now, it's worth noticing a number of things in the text that I guess are somewhat obvious, but I guess it's worth just digging into those for a moment. The first thing that you'll notice is that the servants didn't decide what they were given. The CEO makes the call. And it's exactly the same with you and I. God decides what gifts we're given and how much. It's He who distributes gifts and opportunities. And you might love what you've been given, or you may hate what you've been given, but for most of the time, you didn't choose it. Like, you didn't choose your family. You didn't choose your DNA. You didn't choose where you were born. Like it or not, the CEO makes that decision. The second observation is that the servants aren't given the same amount. Now, I know that, again, it's obvious, but it's a good reminder because some of us fall into the traps of comparison and competition, and it's always worth remembering that actually none of us start at the same point. There's not an equal distribution of gifts and opportunities. And therefore, the great temptation we have is that we jump on social media and we compare our lives with a person who owns a mansion in Florida somewhere. And we think, oh, how come my life isn't like that? It doesn't really amount to much. But it's always worth remembering that when the gifts and opportunities are given out, not everybody gets the same. Thirdly, each servant does get something. So there's no mention in this text of a servant without a bag of gold, which reminds us, of course, that every single one of us in the room today have been given something by God. Either a big opportunity or a small opportunity. Either an impressive public gift or maybe some kind of hidden private gift. Whether it's a large amount of wealth or a meager amount of wealth, at least all of us have been given one gift by the CEO. And then number 4, it's worth noting that each servant is expected to do something with what they've been given. So every servant then hears the question that goes something like this: what will you do with what I've given you? It's like a performance review, which, by the way, mine is coming up very soon. So if you could just look out for one of the elders today and pass on a good word, I'd really appreciate that. And so the servants, they have, at least the servant with 5 bags of gold stands before the CEO, and that guy tells the CEO that he's invested the money really wisely and he's made 5 bags more. And the CEO responds and says, well done, good and faithful servant. Because you've been faithful with a few things, I'm going to give you a whole load of more stuff. And then the servant with 2 bags of gold, he comes in for his performance review. And he says, well, master, I was so grateful for the opportunity that you gave to me. Thank you so much for giving me those 2 bags of gold. I put your money to work and I've made 2 bags more. And the CEO, of course, is full of joy. He says, well done, good and faithful servant. Because I could trust you with a small opportunity, now I'm going to give you loads more opportunities. And then in walks the guy who had 1 bag of gold. And his story is different. When the CEO asks him, what have you done with what I gave to you? His response is nothing. I did nothing with it. Actually, what I did do is I got this big shovel thing and I dug a big hole in the ground and then I just buried it and did nothing with it. Which makes me wonder, why did he do that? I mean, he's been given a wonderful opportunity. He's been given a wonderful gift and he does nothing with it. Why? I wonder whether it was something about comparison that created this passive approach. I wonder if he just spent all of his time wondering, I wonder what it would be like to have 2 bags of gold like that guy over there. Or I wonder what it would be like to have 5 bags of gold like that guy over there. And therefore he did nothing with the 1 bag that he'd been given. I wonder if it was jealousy. I wonder whether he spent all of his time trying to plan a way to sabotage the lives of the people who had got more than him. I wonder if he was just being passive aggressive. I wonder if this was his way of getting back at the CEO because the CEO hadn't really given him enough, so he just did nothing with it. Well, I can speculate all I want, but Jesus tells us why he did nothing, and it was fear. It was fear that caused him to bury his gift. It was fear that made him dig this big hole and do nothing with that thing that had been generously placed into his hands. To maybe change the analogy, it was fear that prevented him getting out of the boat and grabbing hold of the opportunity that had been given. And fear does exactly the same for us, doesn't it? Fear prevents us trusting God because we somehow have this doubt in our minds that he won't really look after us. Fear means that we hoard all our possessions and our money because we're not really sure that he's going to provide for us. Fear seems to paralyze us. Fear stops us doing something with the thing that we've been given. In fact, fear teaches us to do nothing with what we've been given just in case we fail or just in case we end up in a situation that we can't handle. And so fear keeps us in the relative safety and comfort of the boat. You know, it's interesting, isn't it? What the CEO says to the servant. The CEO calls that servant wicked and lazy. Wow. You know, I've never known anybody admit to laziness. I've never known anyone go for a job interview and when they ask that question, like, what are your weaknesses? I've never known anyone say, I'm just too lazy. I mean, I spend all my time on the PlayStation and I lie on the settee and I eat loads of pizza. I mean, nobody does that. When somebody asks the question, like, what is your weakness? Everybody says, I work too hard. I just can't help pushing myself to reach the highest standard. My motto is work, work, work. By the way, if you say that in a job interview, you're probably never going to get the job. Or just a little bit of a tip. You know, historically, laziness has been taken so seriously by Christians that it was included in what was called the 7 deadly sins. They didn't call it laziness, they called it sloth. Wow, it's a terrible word. But it doesn't just refer to, or doesn't necessarily refer to physical laziness. It describes poor stewardship. It's a reference to the way that we rob God when we don't purposefully use what he's given us. So sloth happens when we just live our lives in neutral, when we place all the good gifts that God has given us into the sideboard of our lives and we just do nothing with them. And the problem is, I guess, is that some of us in the room know just enough about the Bible to make us dangerous. Because some of you will say, Pastor, the Lord has told me to wait. I mean, I've read a scripture, Pastor, that says, stand still, do nothing, and wait for God's deliverance. And yes, the Bible does say that, but generally speaking, those passages are directed to people who find themselves in chaos and crisis, and they're facing great opposition, and the temptation is to run as fast as they can, and God says to them, wait, stand still, don't run away, I'm going to deliver you. But he doesn't say, I've given you some great opportunities. I've given you some great gifts. And what I'd love you to do is just stand there and do nothing with them. He doesn't say, stand still and wait because you are taking way too many faith steps. Stand still and wait because you are trusting me like way too much. So stop doing that. No. He calls us out of the comfort and the safety of the boat to do something with what we've been given. So I'll try and say this with as much like pastoral sensitivity as I can. Some of you are waiting for God to do something in your life while God is waiting for you to do something with your life. For some of you, it's time to take your life out of neutral. For some of you, it's time to respond to the call, see the opportunity, see what God has given you, and actually do something with it. It's like time to walk on the water and get out of the boat. Last summer, myself and my family, we've got 4 children who are nearly all grown up. We had the privilege of going on holiday to Florida and to Disney World. We planned on one of the days to go to one of like Disney's large parks. We planned to arrive in the middle of the afternoon where it was a little bit quieter. And so we pulled up to this really large parking lot. And the parking lots at Disney, they tend to be almost like the size of a city. There's like just vast places. And there were very few people around. And as a family, we were walking to the entrance of this massive theme park. And as we were walking, we started to hear the cry of a woman a few hundred meters away. She was screaming for help. And there was nobody else around but us, like our family pretty much. And straight away you could tell this wasn't the cry of somebody who'd lost their car keys. This was like something really, really serious. And so straight away my eldest son Ben and my wife Helen, they ran as fast as they could towards where this woman was. And to cut a really long story short, in that moment discovered that her brother in his mid-30s was lying on the tarmac, unconscious, no pulse, and was dying in front of her and their 2 children. And without going into all of the details, because that would be inappropriate in this moment, for the next 15 to 20 minutes, all the members of my family, along with an off-duty firefighter, we did everything we could to keep that man alive, to comfort his family until the paramedics arrived. And even to this day, we have no idea whether that man survived or not. We know that it really, really didn't look good. But for us as a family, that was a fairly traumatic experience for us. It wasn't what we expected to happen on the day that we rocked up to Disney World. But once the man was taken into the ambulance and attached to a whole variety of different machinery, we huddled up as a family, and I looked all of my family in the eyes, and I said to them, like, I am so proud of you. I'm so proud that you ran towards the danger. I'm so proud that you did something when we could have opted to do nothing. Because in that moment, the comfort of Disney looked pretty impressive, so much more appealing than getting out the boat and heading into the storm. And I tell you that story because there's some of you here who've heard the cry. Like there's some of you here who've heard the call, but you've chosen to sit in the boat and do nothing. Some of you have received from God. He's placed into your hands, generously giving to you opportunities and talents and skills and abilities and resources. But for some reason, probably fear, you've decided, I'm just going to bury that stuff. And so my highly complex, deeply theological encouragement to you today is this: do something. Like, would you just do something? Stop doing nothing and do something. Like, even if it's just tiny baby steps to get out of the boat, do something. I don't need to remind you of this, but I'm gonna. You get one life. There is no rewind button. You don't get to replay this all over again. You get one life. Why not make the most of it and do something significant with what God has given to you? Because He's called you. He's given you opportunities. He's placed gifts into your hands. Please don't bury what God has given you. Amen? So the band are going to join me on the stage and going to lead us as we head to a conclusion. Can I tell you one way that I've been learning how to apply the teaching? Because it's all well and good, isn't it, the pastor talking from the Bible and you guys are going, well, what are you doing about it? So let me tell you what I'm doing about it. Some of you will know, many of you will know a lady called Rachel Hickson. Rachel has been ministering in our church. She's got a strong prophetic ministry. We've got to know her quite well over the last couple of years. And myself, Pastor Shireen and Pastor Gaz, we've been invited to be like part of a leadership cohort that she's putting together of a variety of different, I guess maybe significant leaders in her world and business world and so on. And we plan to meet with her a couple of days this week. About 70 of us. And in preparation for that meeting, she asked, would you send a top 3 of the things you believe God has called you to do, the top 3 of the things that you are called to be, the gifts and the abilities, the resources that God has given to you? So I was tasked, as the other guys were tasked with, like sending the list of the top 3 things. So number 1 was kind of easy for me. Because for the last couple of decades, as you know, I've been one of the pastors of the church here. So top of the list was I'm firstly a local church pastor, and I've probably got something of like a teaching apostolic gifting thing going on. So that's who I am, number 1. And then number 2, it's kind of easy for me because I have some national responsibilities with Elim. I'm part of the national leadership team of Elim, overseeing about 550 churches in the UK and a few thousand beyond that. So I play a bit of a part with that. So that was easy for me. Number 2, I'm a kind of a national leader thing. And what would I write for number 3? That was less simple and would take a greater step of faith for me. Because one of the things that you may know about me is that I do like to write. I really love to craft sentences and paragraphs, and you probably, when you listen to me talk, you go, oh yeah, like because I kind of read it, I've carefully crafted everything that I say and write. And about 2 years ago, I wrote my first book called Wholehearted. Some of you may have read it. If you haven't, it's there. That was a shameless plug. Oh, that was terrible. I got 2 more books coming out, one in the autumn with Shopi, and then another book that I've written coming out in February. But here's the thing about that for me, I have self-doubt about that. Like I actually have fear about that. Should I tell you what my self-doubt is? My self-doubt is I don't know that it's any good. My self-doubt is nobody will read it. My self-doubt is, if it's not very good, I don't know that anybody would tell me it's not very good. And so when I'm thinking about what am I going to write as number 3, thinking I know what I want to write because I know what I think God has called me to do, or maybe he's given me a gift to do, but I'm really not confident to get out the boat and to say that's what I think I should do with a portion of my life. And so for some time, I looked at number 3 and eventually plucked up the courage to write author. And I'm like, wow, I mean, it's a bit of a step of faith. I mean, nobody might read the stuff, but it's a step of faith. And I wonder what God has given to you. Like, what is the gift that God has given to you? And it may be in like an embryonic form, and it's really tiny right now, but it's just going to take a step of faith for you to come out and say, I'm going to do something with this small thing that God has given to me. And what is it? What is that opportunity that God has given you? Like, what is that gift that he's placed into your hands? And it feels so valuable that you may, I don't even know if I could use it. I don't even know. You feel afraid. And today, God is speaking to your heart by his Spirit, and he's saying, come on, step out of the boat. Come on, like do something, even a baby step with something that I've given you. Come on. Can you hear the call of Jesus? Come. Would you stand with me if you're able? Thank you so much for listening. all around the building, online, would you mind just placing your hand on your heart for a moment of prayer? And as you place your hand on your heart, will you just think about the gifts, the skills, the opportunities, the resources that God's given you? And would you think about those things that you've been burying? Maybe the less obvious things. And would you maybe even now make a declaration to God and say, God, I'm not going to bury this. I'm not going to do nothing. I'm not going to do nothing. I'm going to do something with what you've given to me. Father, we are so grateful today that as our Master, you've given us so many good gifts. For some, you've given us 1 bag of gold. For some, you've given 2. For some, you've given 5. But Lord, you've given something to every single one of us today. And we choose not to do nothing. We choose to say, God, I'm going to take a step. I'm going to take a step. I'm going to get out of the boat and I'm going to make room today for you to do something with my life and in my life. I'm not going to hold back. I'm going to step out. I'm going to trust you, placing my hand in your hand, believing that together we can walk on water. And so we look to you today and we honor you, Jesus. And we choose to serve you. And we pray in your name.